a friend of mine. It's a friend from childhood. When I lived in Peru, him and I went to the same school. So welcome, Fernando. Welcome for being here.
Thank you, Eddie. Thanks for the opportunity to be in your podcast. It's been a long time. As you said, we've met each other. We've known each other since childhood, but we haven't seen each other for
I know
20-something years, 30 years.
Yeah, or more. I think so. The times that we have crossed paths, like I've gone to Peru for anything, reunions or anything, we've crossed paths, so we haven't been able to. Actually, physically, I don't think I've seen you in a while. Welcome to another episode of In the Middle. In this podcast, I talk about my experiences living in two or more cultures. My name is Eddie Minaya. I'm a creative professional living in the Washington, D.C. area. I was originally born in Peru, but I grew up in the D.C. area and I've lived in this area for the last 35 years. Today I have a friend of mine. It's a friend from childhood. When I lived in Peru, him and I went to the same school. So welcome, Fernando. Welcome for being here.
Thank you, Eddie. Thanks for the opportunity to be in your podcast. It's been a long time. As you said, we've met each other. We've known each other since childhood, but we haven't seen each other for
I know
20-something years, 30 years.
Yeah, or more. I think so. The times that we have crossed paths, like I've gone to Peru for anything, reunions or anything, we've crossed paths, so we haven't been able to. Actually, physically, I don't think I've seen you in a while. You still hear me okay?
I lost you for a little while, but I can hear you now.
Okay. So yeah, to give everyone listening a context, Fernando and I, we went to when I lived in Peru, him and I went to the same elementary school. So I lived in Peru until I was 13, and I came to the United States when I was finishing at that time was ninth grade. And him and I kind of went to the school, elementary school, and then part of high school. And Fernando, give me a little more context about you. You finished school in Peru, correct? Your high school, and then what happened after that?
Actually, no, I didn't finish school in Lima. I left a year before graduation, and I moved with my family to the Dominican Republic. My dad got a job in Santo Domingo, which was quite a surprise, but at the time it was, I think, right after Alan Garcia's government. You remember, you were very young, we were both young, but it was a really difficult time, hyperinflation and so on. So my dad was an entrepreneur. He had his own business with his brother, and it just went terribly. I mean, it was really bad for him. So he started to look for work outside of Peru and was able to, through a friend of his, able to find a job in the Dominican Republic. It was a big decision, but we decided to move at the end. So I finished high school in the Dominican Republic. Because the educational system is slightly different, I actually had to do 2 more years. I had 1 year left in Peru and I had to do 2 years in the Dominican Republic. And I think it's because in Peru you have prep. You have to, the school that you have. Before you go to university, you have to prepare. In Lima, I don't know if you remember this. So in the Dominican Republic, it's not like that. It's very easy to get into school. So anyway, I finished my 2 years of high school in Santo Domingo, and then I moved to the U.S. And I lived in the U.S. I went to school in the U.S. I went to college in Nebraska, of all places. I actually started in Omaha, and then I moved to Lincoln a year later, graduated there, then moved to Florida, and worked in Florida for a few years before I moved away of the U.S. to move here to Prague.
You moved quite a bit. So it was from Lima to the Dominican Republic, and then from the Dominican Republic to Nebraska in the United States, then to Florida, and then to the Czech Republic, which is where you are now.
Yep, to Prague. Yeah, exactly.
Man. So tell me, when you first moved to the Dominican Republic, because you were, I guess at that time, probably somewhere around 14, 15. 15 years old.
Yeah,
right?
I turned 15 right before we left. Yeah.
So how different was it when you first arrived to the Dominican Republic in terms of like the culture? Everyone speaks Spanish, but their Spanish is different because it's a different, it's just different period. It's a different country, and the culture, it's still somewhat different. How difficult was it for you to get acquainted to the Dominican culture when you first arrived?
Yeah, it was. You're absolutely right. It's actually, I think it's a really big difference in cultures between Peru and Dominican Republic, or at least it was at the time. Mm-hmm. Now with globalization, social media, things have gotten a little bit more common between cultures. But at the time, it was a big shock. It was people had a very different mentality that in the Dominican Republic than Peru. And for a kid, I was 15 when your social life, it's everything. You speak with slang. You know how to communicate. In a certain way.
Yeah.
It was difficult. It was difficult. I didn't know any of the slang, any of the lingo. So people were making fun of me not only because of my accent, but the words that I used. That were not. I actually learned when I left Peru that a lot of the words that I used were only used in Peru. Like I had no idea. So many words that I use in my regular vocabulary, people didn't know. Like I can give examples. Like for example, I remember very clearly that I had that chancar is not a word that uses out of Peru. It's I think it comes from Quechua.
Yeah.
So no one knew what that was, or pita, or many other things. So anyway, so it was actually for me a bigger culture shock to move from Peru to the Dominican Republic than from the Dominican Republic to the US, believe it or not. Even though there were different languages, there was somehow a little more affinity between, the way, my way of thinking with people that I met in the US than in the Dominican Republic. I was a little bit older too as well, so maybe that has something to do with it. And it was very international too, I met a lot of people from different parts of the world. So I think that helped a bit, yeah.
So after you finished high school at the, I guess in the Dominican Republic, what made you come to the United States and not go to school within the Dominican Republic, or even go back to Peru, I guess, to go back to go to the university?
Yeah, right. That's a good question. I wanted to go to the US. It was kind of like a dream of mine, something that I always wanted to move to the US, and I also didn't want to stay in the Dominican Republic. Nothing against the country, I have a lot of good friends there. I had a good time, but it was just not a place where I wanted to, I didn't want to stay there longer, have a family career. I just didn't see myself there for a long time. So, and I had relatives that lived in Nebraska. I have my uncle and my aunt who lived there, and they were very happy to have me. And so that's the only opportunity that I had really. If I wanted to go stay with someone, going on my own at that age, didn't know enough. So it seemed like a good opportunity. So I said, let's go to Nebraska. I knew nothing about it, and it was a shock, but it was great at the end. I mean, it was a really great experience.
So while you were in the Dominican Republic before you moved to the United States, how do the people in the Dominican Republic, how do they, I guess, welcome foreigners? And in this case, you still, from Latin America, but you're from South America, from Peru. How do they, how was it? Because one thing I remember when we were in school, like when we were kids, and we were used to get people that were from foreigners. I remember this a few times where there was like probably diplomats' kids, and they didn't speak Spanish. They were either from the United States. I remember meeting somebody from Germany. But what I do remember is that the first thing that we taught them was bad words, in school. Like, it's like all of a sudden the kids spoke any Spanish, and all of a sudden they start saying, bad words because it was funny for us. And I don't know if that was mean now that I look back, because it's just, it's like, are we making fun of them because they're just learning the language? How was it in the Dominican Republic? Like, how do they welcome the people that were, I guess, foreigners? And were there a lot of foreigners like you at that time in school, or were there very few?
Yeah. I think I was the only foreigner there. I think, if I remember correctly, me and my sister. They were friendly. I mean, they were nice. I mean, they were teenagers, I mean, they're not going to be super friendly. They'll still tease you a bit and so on, is what teenagers do, But in general, not only in school but in general, Dominicans were super welcoming. Yeah, they were very curious about our culture, what how we live over there and so on, and very nice, very friendly.
Okay. So
like I said, the only issue for me was mainly the way they spoke differently, and so it took me a while to learn the lingo, and that was that took the longest. My sister, because she was younger, she picked it up much faster than me. My sister, after 6 months, you couldn't tell she was not Dominican. She spoke like a Dominican. No one would ever guess that she wasn't. But me, no, I never fully adopted the Dominican culture or language. So for me, I was always a foreigner. So.
Wow. Okay. And then once you make the leap over coming to the United States and you went to Nebraska, was that your first time coming to the United States? So how was that culture shock? I guess now you're going from Peru, now you live now in the Dominican Republic and now the United States. How was it at first when you first arrived?
It wasn't my first time in the US. I had already been, but only to Miami, which I guess I don't know if it counts. Like it's very different from.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah.
The suburbs there, quite different from what I'm used to from Lima and from Dominican Republic, and people were friendly, not super warm, but friendly in general. They were not mean, so it didn't take me that long to make friends. There were, like as I mentioned before, there were a lot of people from different parts of the world, a lot of Latin American people as well. So I quickly made friends from Panama, from Bolivia, from Ecuador, and also from some Europeans as well, and then some Americans as well. So it was not difficult. And I was staying with my uncle and aunt, as I said, so that made it easier as well to start with.
That's good, because I can tell you from my experience when I first moved to the United States, and I came, at the age of when I was 13, so I was a little younger, but when I first came, they put me into the, first of all, they tested me to know the level of English that I knew, and then also actually, that's all they tested me for. And they put me in the lowest level of ESL, which is English as a second language here in the United States, in the program. But I knew how to, I knew how to write English well. I knew how to read English well, because when we went to school, as you know, our school was, we were taught English since kindergarten. I mean, it was like the whole time.
Yeah.
I was not fluent speaking probably as much, but I knew. So, and then they put me on the lowest level of math without testing me. So I was in a room with a lot of people and at that time in the area that I live in, the DC area, there was a lot of people from Central America that, like El Salvador, Nicaragua, they were escaping the war at that time that was happening in the late 80s. And their lingo was also very different. So for me, I had a really hard time adjusting, because it put me in Peru. When I left, we were doing, this is ninth grade, so tercero de media, and over there we were doing, I think at that point, if not with algebra, they put me a class here to add and subtract numbers. So I was like, what, so it took me a while to kind of understand the system. And then I was asked to be retested, or tested, because I was never tested. But it sounded like maybe because I was younger, maybe it was just a different situation. To me, I did have just like you had a kind of adjusting to the Dominican Republic, I had a hard time adjusting to the people here in the high school. I liked the theme, but it was just different, and the people were so different, and the lingo was different. Yeah, I spoke, I understood, I don't know if you ever heard the Salvadorian accent, but there was a lot of people from the countryside in El Salvador, and they had sometimes they have these words that I was like, what, like they're the opposite of what it means, what it meant to me at that time. Words like pendejo, to me, I was like, for me, that's, for us, it means in Peru. It's a bad word, yeah. Yeah, it's a bad word. It's like someone that's like, you're a smart, sound like smart ass. But for them, it's completely the opposite,
It's an idiot. It's an idiot.
Yeah.
Yeah, same in Dominican Republic. I had the same thing. The pendejo in Dominican Republic is an idiot, and for me, it was somebody like a badass. So I know what you mean.
Yeah, so it was a little difficult, but for me, it took me a little bit to adjust, and then I thought many times, and I told my mom that I wanted to go back to Peru, but I didn't have much of a choice at that time, so
Right.
I was a kid, I didn't know. I mean, it was not up to me, so I ended up staying.
Right.
So Fernando, after Nebraska, you went to college there. And then so you stay there for 4 years, and then you moved to Florida after that?
Yeah, well, the plan was 4 years, but it took me 5.5, so so it wasn't 4. But I changed careers, and I started with architecture, but I didn't go as planned, so I ended up with advertising. And yeah, once I graduated, I started to look for work in a few different places. Wasn't able to get a job, and then I'm again following my aunt and uncle because they had already moved away from Nebraska to Florida, and that's the only family that I had there. So and I had no job and nothing like this. So my choices were to either go back to the Dominican Republic, which I didn't want to do. My parents were still there, or try to stay in the U.S. So I stayed. I went to see my aunt and uncle again. They were in Fort Lauderdale, and moved there. And within a couple of weeks, I got a job. So it wasn't difficult, and I stayed in Florida. But I never really liked Florida too much. So it also took me some time to adjust to the culture there. Once again, I have nothing against it. I had quite a few good friends and a lot of good memories, but not a place where I wanted to stay. So I stayed a little longer than I should have. Actually stayed there for almost a little over 5 years. And then for other reasons that I probably will tell you later on, ended up in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, for Lauderdale, I have nothing against Florida either, but it's just to me also, I'm not, it's too hot, I don't know, it's just not my scene either. Fort Lauderdale is a very nice place. I've been there, but actually one of my kids now live there, and he's always been wanting to move to Florida ever since he was a kid, and he did, and he keeps moving farther south, and now he's in Fort Lauderdale. But it is, it's not for everybody either. So I know a lot of people they think about here in the United States, when they retire, they want to go farther south. We are thinking of moving up north, like farther up, instead of going farther south. But so how different was Fort Lauderdale for you in terms of the? I'm assuming Fort Lauderdale, what I remember is it's a lot more diversity, probably a lot more than Nebraska, right? I mean, I've never been to Nebraska, so I don't know what it's like, but my guess is that there's a lot more diversity, a lot more cultures in Fort Lauderdale, and at least even then when you lived there, how different was it from Nebraska?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was Fort Lauderdale or all southern Florida. It's much more multicultural, but especially from Latin America. There's a lot of Latin Americans there from all over in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Beautiful Beach, all of that. So in that sense, it was kind of cool, to be able to go back to an area full of Spanish-speaking people, and I miss a little bit of that. So that was nice. But yeah, like you said, I didn't like the weather. It was a big thing for me, like hot and humid all the time. You have to be in AC all the time. There is no public transportation, so the lifestyle was just you get up in the morning, AC, get out of your house, jump into your car, drive to work, get inside an office, AC, go back home, then maybe you go to the gym or like a shopping center or something at night. You just don't hang out outside. It's just too hot. I mean, you can, but it's not as pleasant as living in a place with four seasons and in a city where you can actually walk around, which is something that more my kind of place.
Gotcha. Do you think you fit it? Like you felt like you fit it within the culture, within the American culture, when you lived in Nebraska and when you lived in Fort Lauderdale? You felt acquainted to the American culture when you lived here?
I don't know. It's a good question. I like living in the U.S. a lot. I like living in Nebraska. I felt actually that I integrated into the culture quite well to begin with. I think the majority of my friends were American. I only had a couple of Latin American friends. I spoke the language well. I communicated well. I was into football. It's like really got into the whole American culture. Then I moved to Fort Lauderdale. It was slightly different. There was more of a Latin American vibe, and it actually took me a little time to also adapt back to what you said about the different lingo. There are a lot of different people from different parts of Latin America. So a lot of people that I met, sometimes from Colombia, Venezuela, it was a little tricky sometimes to understand some of the expressions and so on. But I was happy. I was actually quite comfortable there, except for the fact that the things that I mentioned before. I tried to move to different cities, but I was there on a work visa. I never became a resident in the U.S. I just didn't want to do it the typical way of paying someone or marrying somebody. I just didn't want to do it. So I never did. I had a few jobs, and every job that I had, I did it all the legal way. I got a job. Yep. They helped me process my visa.
Yeah.
Because of that, I didn't have the opportunities as somebody else who could just quit his job, move somewhere else, and look for a job. That's the ideal way to do it. I had to find something in advance, which made it very, very difficult. I wanted to go to California. That was my thing. I wanted to go to San Francisco or maybe San Diego. And I applied for I applied for work there, and I had a couple of interviews, but it's quite difficult when you're not there in person. You have to apply for work, get into a plane, go do a couple of interviews. They might like it, they might not. It was complicated. So I never had a chance to move out of Florida until I had the opportunity to go to Europe.
Yeah, I mean, anyone working with a visa, sometimes it is challenging. But, it's, I think, a lot more common also, doing interviews via remote. It's a different world, but it is.
Yeah.
Some of the things you describe, I think, is still a challenge for someone, especially that's coming from a different country, and coming to school and trying to get a work visa and working with a work visa. So then, Fernando, then after that, you decided, what made you decide to go to where you are now, which is the Czech Republic? Like first of all, before you even moved, had you been to that part of the world before?
No, I had never been to Europe. I always wanted to go, but for some reason it just never happened. That's one thing that I regret, is not making a trip to Europe after graduating from college. I got some people that I knew, including my girlfriend at the time, did. Because once I did end up coming to Europe years later, I loved it. I really like it here, so I would have liked it a lot. It probably would have changed my life. I think if I would have made a visit here earlier. But anyways, when I lived in Florida, I met a girl. I met a Czech girl. That's the main reason.
Always a story.
Exactly, of course, yes. But especially here, the Czech women are quite good looking. So there are the majority of foreigners you meet here, they're here because of a girl. So yes, I met this girl. It's a long story, but to make a long story short, we were dating, and then she wanted to move back home, back to Czech Republic, and she really wanted to go back. So I wasn't planning on going anywhere, so we left it at see you later, hopefully, and that was it. And then I guess destiny had different plans for me, because a few months later, I was told that I was going to lose my job. My boss was actually a friend of mine, and he called me at night and told me, "Listen, tomorrow I have to fire you. I have to let you go because we're downsizing, and I have to let you go. I'm just letting you know in advance." And I explained to him that I have a work visa, and that means that if they fire me, I lose my visa, I have to leave the country, which was crazy. I had actually bought a flat that day. I got a call from this guy. So it was, so my whole world just came crumbling down. If you can imagine, I lived in the US, and I felt very, very at home, very secure. My idea, I had no plans of going anywhere. I was buying a flat. I wanted to have a family. I wanted to live the American dream sort of thing. And but then this happened. It kind of made me realize that that my situation was not nearly as stable as it seemed. I'm there on a work visa as a temporary status, really, and I should either do something about it or go somewhere else. And anyway, to make a long story short, I did end up getting another job. I formalized everything. Like I was able to get another visa. It was fine, but I didn't like at all. My whole view of me being in the States really changed after that. And the fact that I had my girlfriend living in Prague, started thinking that maybe it's not a bad idea to go to Europe and just try my luck, see how things are there. So I did. So I sold everything that I had and just packed my bags and left, just to try my luck.
Wow, so you went by yourself, like your girlfriend that you had at that time was living here, there, but you technically sold, put everything in a suitcase and moved there to figure it out.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much, yeah. Like I said, I had already bought a flat, as I told you, but the day that I got a call that I was gonna get fired, so the following morning I called the bank and I canceled the transaction. I had just paid for it. And then I was able to cancel the whole thing. So I didn't own property at the time. I just had a car and a few things. So I just sold all my properties and left. So I had nothing really holding me back. And then I moved to Prague. I met my girlfriend here, and then everything was, of course, completely new to me. Came in the middle of the winter, which is not the best time to come, but still, it's a beautiful place. Prague has always been a beautiful city, so I was quite impressed. And yeah, it didn't last too long with her. We actually stayed only together for like 6 months, but I came with the intention to start my own business and see if I could make it here, and I did. I mean, my plan, actually a little naive, but my plan was, I had a pretty good amount of money saved. So my plan was to try to get a job, try to start my own business. You know that I was a graphic designer at the time. We talked about it before. So my idea was to start my own digital agency. And if it didn't go well, for whatever reason, it just didn't work out, I would just travel through Europe for like a year, with my savings, get to see what I didn't do after college. And after that, I would have to go to Peru. I would have no other option. I couldn't go back to the US. So it was a big risk for me to leave my lifestyle, in the US, to try to start a new life in Europe. And if I fail, I'll have to go back to the US, to Peru, which is not a horrible thing, but I had not lived in Peru since I was 15, so it would have been a bit difficult. So yeah, but please, things worked out. With my company, which is still running. So I stay here. Yeah. Yeah. For people that are listening, Fernando and I are in a very similar work field, and then I've worked with him in a few things. He's got a very, very amazing and very talented staff that I've worked with in the past. So, Fernando, once you got to the Czech Republic, how different was it for you? Like when you first arrived, because I've been to Europe, never been to the Czech Republic, but even for me, the first time I went to Europe, it's different. It's very different than the United States. It's similarities to some what you see in Peru, but it is also very different. It's somewhere in between. That's the only way I can describe it. How was it for you when you first arrived in terms of like the culture and I'm assuming you didn't speak the language either, right? No, not at all. It was actually great. It was actually, I think, the easiest transition from all the other ones that I had throughout my life, because I was older already, and I already had the experience of moving to a new country, and getting to know the culture and so on. So it wasn't that difficult to me at all. And also there were a lot of foreigners, a lot of expats living here, a lot of people kind of like in a similar situation as me, coming here to try their luck for a few years. So a lot of people looking to meet other people. So actually it was a ton of fun. I mean, I remember when I first moved here and I was single for, I don't know, maybe 3 years. It was just party time, like every night. I mean, I don't remember ever staying home. Like there was always something to do every night. So yeah, it was really, really a ton of fun. And as I say, Prague is a beautiful city, even more so now. So there was a lot to see. The mentality is different, but I like that actually. I like the mentality here better than I like the American mentality. When I lived there, I really enjoyed it, but now that I compare it to the lifestyle here, I like the lifestyle mentality in Europe more than the American one. So it was not difficult. The language it's a nightmare. I mean, the language I've been learning Czech for 20 years, and I'm still not very good. I mean, if you compare it to English, I mean, it took me. You said that we went to school in Peru and we were learning English, but it really wasn't a very good English education, I would say. I mean, it was pretty bad actually. And then I went to school in the Dominican Republic, which was better, and I learned better English. I also went to some, side school to learn more. And when I moved to US, my English level was quite good, and it still was pretty bad. But it took within a year, I spoke it fluently. I mean, really, really well. I've been here for 20 years, and my Czech it's pretty sad. I mean, I speak it. I can understand everything that people tell me. I can get by, but I don't feel comfortable. It's just not. It's a very, very complicated language.
So how do you get around now so if you even with your employees, do you want primarily is it English?
Yeah, I speak English all the time. With my work, with my friends, even at home with my wife and I speak English. So I don't really need to speak Czech. I mean, I do speak it and I use it on a daily basis, but just to go to a store and buy stuff, go to a restaurant or order things online or things like this, or talking to people on the street. I have some Czech friends, but I don't think I have any friends that don't speak English. So all of my world is it's in English here, or Spanish. Of course, I do have Spanish speaking friends here, and I speak only Spanish to my daughter, for example. So
interesting. So is your daughter learning three languages, I guess? Czech. Oh, is she learning Spanish, Czech, and also English? So it's trilingual.
Yeah, English came for free. I mean, so Sasha, my wife, spoke to her in Czech. I spoke to her in Spanish as she was growing up, and we spoke English, my wife and I, at home. So at first, of course, she didn't understand English, but she's 9 now. She's gonna be 10 very soon. And I think about 2 years ago, she started to speak English on her own. She started she started to get involved in our conversations a little bit, and then within a year, she's fluent. Yeah, she's fluent. But before that, it was a very strange thing because we would sit on the table, for example, to eat, and I would talk to my daughter in Spanish. He would talk to my wife in Czech, and my wife would talk to me in English. And that's how we communicated at home. It was really weird, but yeah.
So how do the people in the Czech Republic, the local people, how do they, when you mentioned that there's a lot of foreigners just that move there at some point to try their luck, or they're still moving there because it is a growing country, but how do they treat or how do they feel around people that, one, they may hear a different language, right? So if you're speaking Spanish with someone that is your friends, and how do the local people feel about when they hear a different language? Are they open-minded about this? And then how do they feel about just the foreigners, period, that are living there?
Yeah. But I think Prague is quite different from the rest of the country, because it's a big city and people are more open-minded. They have traveled more, so there's absolutely no problem with Czechs and foreigners. Actually, they're very welcoming. But in general, Czechs, even outside of Prague, are quite curious about our country, our countries, our cultures, and so on. So they're not xenophobic. They're not for the most part. So I didn't have any issues with anyone moving here. In terms of the language, actually, Spanish is a very popular language here. People actually really like Spanish here. There are a lot of people that speak it here that want to learn it. I think they associate Spanish with fun. Spanish is a fun language. So it's a positive thing for us Latin American people or Spanish people living here. We're actually seen in a positive light, I think, which is quite different from my experience in the U.S. In the U.S., you don't want to speak Spanish in public. You're always afraid somebody might say something to you. It's kind of here. You can go. My daughter and I go into any tram or bus or any public transportation or any public place, speaking Spanish, and she talks really loud. She's yelling. She's a kid, and no one cares. But it's Europe, everybody speaks a different language, so it's very different in that sense, which I like.
Yeah, and I noticed that quite. We went to this summer. We were in Spain, Morocco, and I've been to Germany. I've been to Ireland, And like even when you go to places, bigger cities in Europe, it does feel like they're almost welcoming all this, they want to know more about different languages. Here in the United States, I mean, there's this wave of, I don't know, I can't put my finger on it of what it is, but it's like, we're here, you got to speak English. And sincerely, that's like, I speak English almost every day. I only speak Spanish now really with my mom, and that's like, I call her like every day, but that's my only practice of Spanish. So for me, it has even been difficult to like, and I'm sure maybe for you it's similar. It's like I've learned some terms that are only in English, right? So if I'm trying to translate that to my mom, it's like I have a difficult time trying to translate something because I don't know how to say that in Spanish, because I never learned how to say that in Spanish. And it's sometimes difficult, but it is. I think I've noticed that in Europe, and kind of a big difference between them. And how big is the Latino population now, you think, in the Czech Republic, at least in Prague where you are? Is it larger than before? Is it growing?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's growing, but in general, the number of expats has grown a lot. There's more and more foreigners living in Prague, because it's a very it's a city in high demand. There are a lot of people moving here. It's a lot more foreign investment, a lot more money coming in as well. So yeah, it's a much more cosmopolitan city than it used to be when I moved here 20 years ago. When I moved here 20 years ago, there were a lot of foreigners that you could meet online and go out, but you would walk on the streets and you wouldn't see them at all. Like I always say to people that 20 years ago I had long hair, and I would walk into a tram or a metro, and people would look at me. People would just stare at me like, "Who is this guy?" It's like now no one gives a crap about me. No one cares. I mean, I go anywhere. It's like I'm like just one other person, because it's much more diverse. It wasn't like that before. But it is now. I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, that's
no, it did. I mean, I was just trying to get an idea of what it's like over there for the Latinos that do live there. And how do?
Oh yeah, you asked me. Sorry, you asked me about the amount of Latin American people that live here.
Oh yeah, yes.
Yeah, that was your original question. Sorry, I don't know. I don't know exactly, but very few compared to other European countries for sure. Much lower than Germany. Much lower than Italy or France. I would say like Peruvians. I remember 10 years ago there were literally like 150, like that many, like nothing. Like now, I don't know, but I would assume there might be maybe 400 Peruvians here. I would say at the most. And Peruvians, I think, were the third largest population of Latin Americans here. I think it was Cubans, Mexicans, because of they were communist countries, so there were a lot of exchange between them. Mexicans because it's a large country, and then Peru was the third one. And of course, not counting Spain, there's much more Spanish people from Spain here than any other Spanish-speaking country.
Well, for them it's a little easier, I guess, to travel because of the European Union.
Just around the corner,
yeah, so it's easier for them to go.
Yeah.
So how do they? So how, when like Latino, and you mentioned like your daughter speaks 3 languages, how do you keep your culture or the Peruvian culture, I guess, or do you with your daughter, or at home with your wife and your daughter? I mean, how do you trying to keep her alive? Because as I had a child, it's been difficult for me to do it with my kids. My kids are older, in their 20s, but they know the food. That's I've taken them to Peru, both of them, to learn more about what it is, and they liked it. But that's the culture. It's like when I remind them of something, this is this way, we do it this way because of this. It's almost like they're forgetting because now they're on their own. How do you do that with your daughter now? Are you trying to keep that alive, the Peruvian culture with your family?
Yeah, I mean, I try to teach her as much as possible about my culture. I try to pass on to her as much as I can. It's not that easy because, we are in a different country. I don't have that many Peruvian friends here. I mean, I do some, but they don't have kids her age. So, she only gets it through me, which is difficult, So I'm happy that she speaks Spanish, and I try to motivate her as much as possible to speak Spanish and to find her friends that are Spanish speakers. And it doesn't matter too much if they're from Peru or anywhere else. Like, for example, she doesn't have a Peruvian accent at all. She has, well, I don't have a Peruvian accent. You know, I live in the Dominican Republic, so I changed my accent in Miami. So I don't have. You probably don't either, right? I mean, you lived in the U.S. Your accent is a mess. Yeah, so is mine. So, but she has more of a, she like a mixed accent, and she actually uses a lot of. She conjugates a little bit like from Spain, like vosotros instead of ustedes. Because she has a mess. But by going back to the Peruvian culture, she's been to Peru with me a few times. She loves Peru. She really likes going to Peru. And there are a lot of things about the Peruvian culture she likes. I think she finds it exotic, you know, as something completely different for her. And there's some things that she doesn't like the food she likes ceviche. She doesn't like, she doesn't like panettone, which it's Italian, I know, but it's very adopted in Peru. So it's like one of my favorite treats. But other than that, I teach her as much as I can about the culture, you know, the Inca Empire, you know, all the things that the few things that I remember, I try to pass on to her. And then she talks to my parents as well, and then, you know, she gets a little bit of culture from them as well. Yeah, that's about it.
Do you think there's and that starting to see in a wave here in the United States of kids that are biracial, so their parents, you know, one parent is from one culture, the other one from a different culture. And I do think that in the United States, that's one thing that is evolving, and I think in the next, at least that's just my vision, in the next like 20 years, everyone is going to look very mixed, I think, because there has been now this, but how sometimes biracial kids here in the United States still have sometimes challenges, you know, with identity and trying to identify themselves. Am I, you know, this or am I that? Or because I'm right in the middle, because I'm both. How do they, like, you think you're like kids in school because your daughter, you're Peruvian, her mom is from the Czech Republic. Does that not like even comes to that? Like, that's something that you don't see in that side of the world, or do you think you see some of it?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, there are a lot of foreigners here, but at the same time, they're still predominantly Czech. Of course, like the area where we live, for example, there are, but not so many. Like in her school, she right now is definitely the only Spanish-speaking kid. And I think there's one other kid in the whole school that speaks Spanish. And in her class, there's one girl from Ukraine that came here because of the war, and a couple of Vietnamese kids, just because there are a lot of Vietnamese people here in Prague. So she's, and there's two more English-speaking kids, you know, I think from American English parents. So there are a few, but not so many. But kids, I think they're quite open-minded here. There's not. She had one incident when one kid that made some kind of remark, I don't remember what, about in a negative way about her nationality in some event. But other than that, it's always been positive. So no, I think people are already used to the multiculturalism, I guess. But not to say that everybody is for it. There's a lot of actually there are a lot of people that are opposed to globalization and migration and things like this. There's a lot of that as well. Yeah.
So now at home, when you you know, you cook at home, like you try to keep some Peruvian dishes kind of alive, or does your wife has she learned any to cook any Peruvian dishes? And how do you get acquainted now to the food, the Czech, you know, the food from there? Do you like it? You know, what's your favorite? How do you, you know, because to me, eating Peruvian food is a treat now. I don't eat it every day. I don't eat it. Besides the fact that I know it's you know, I know it's gonna taste good, but I know it, you know, it's sort of high in carbs, and you know, it's fried, whatever it may be, but I know it's gonna taste good. You know, having arroz con pollo with picarona, you know, that's a treat. You know, so that's how I see it. But but I don't eat it every day. How do you do at your house now? With your family? Do you try to keep at least up, you know, that almost as an everyday thing, or is it also kind of just as a treat, like it is for me?
Right. Eating is it's a problem in this house. We have a bit of we're a bit dysfunctional in that way because my wife she can't eat gluten.
Okay.
I am mostly vegan, not 100%, but I try not to eat meat or animal products. But I'm quite flexible. And my daughter, she's a difficult eater. In general, she doesn't want anything. So it's very common that we sit on the table and we have 3 different dishes. We're just each eating something different. So once in a while we eat together and so on. But culturally, yes, we do cook some Peruvian meals. I'm not a very good cook, and I don't know how to make anything Peruvian. Unfortunately, when I cook, I just do it like for whatever comes out of my mind. But my wife makes a really good ceviche. She really does a really, really good ceviche. So we actually have adopted ceviche as a Christmas tradition, which I know she's very aware that in Peru people don't eat ceviche for Christmas, but that's our tradition, which I love. So every Christmas we have ceviche, and then we have what is typical of Czech Republic, which is I think schnitzel, what do you call this, like chicken steak, with bread, apanado, with what's called in Peru ensalada rusa, Russian salad, which actually is Czech salad. So the combination of 2 things, ceviche and that, and of course for me panettone. I can't go without panettone for Christmas. So that's our Christmas. And but other than that, we don't eat Peruvian food very often. There are no Peruvian restaurants here. There were a couple, and they didn't do that well. But there are a lot of people that cook in events, or sometimes they do things in their own houses. So there are opportunities to try Peruvian food, but not as many as larger cities here, like in Paris or Berlin or even in Vienna. There are Peruvian restaurants everywhere, but here unfortunately not too many. So
interesting. Yeah, that's one thing that, well, at least in DC where I live, it's just they're everywhere.
That's great.
Pollo la brasa, and they do well for the most part. Most of those restaurants do well. They don't even do any marketing. Their marketing is the smell of their chicken, for example. That's great. Yeah. And they do well because of that. But it is the city you live in. It is a smaller city, but where I live is a little bigger. But it is there's pros and cons, I guess, with both. Well, Fernando, appreciate it, man. Really, all the time you took today. It was great to catch up with you, but also to learn more about the Czech Republic and kind of the culture and how things how things are over there on that side of the world. I've never been, but I think as you kind of start describing the city, we may end up.
You should come visit.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a great place to go and visit, and it sounds like a great city. So I'm definitely going to be on my bucket list to go. All right, for anyone listening, at this podcast, it's you can stream it in Apple Podcast, Google Podcast. It's there. I'm going to leave the description below if you're listening to that on YouTube, and you'll be able to get to all the links to all the different services, so you'll be able to catch up. This is chapter 11. All right, everyone listening, thank you for listening, and we'll be back again. Thank you. If you like this content, don't forget to subscribe or hit the like button. And if you're interested in being in this podcast, please send me an email, send me a message, and I will be more than happy to have you as a guest.